Most food is bland. That is a fact. Things haven't evolved to taste good, as that would truly hurt their chances at survival. But, sadly, if humans or any other animal don't eat food, we die. Humans, with all our creativity, use seasoning to make us enjoy the meals that we have each and every day. And most seasoning has a rich tradition in the world, since it's been around for millennia. One seasoning is different, one that has a rich tradition in the world, and has for a long time, even if no one knew about it. That's MSG.
Welcome to Spoonable Standpoint, the podcast where your hosts, Leo and Charlene, dig into food culture. In this episode, we will discuss the impact of MSG and the negativity that has been associated with it. How has it contributed to hate towards Asian Americans? Why did this hate become so popular? Is it really that bad for your health? But first, how did MSG come to be created?
MSG, or monosodium glutamate, is among the most widely used seasoning in the world. But different from the other popular seasonings, is that it's not obvious to obtain. That is, you can't find it in an ocean or pick it off a plant. And unlike other popular seasonings, it enhances a specific taste that up until recently wasn't really known. Umami.
It was this umami flavor that got Professor Kikunai Ikeda, a chemistry professor in Japan, to even begin to think about it, although at that time he didn't know that it was umami. One day, while he was eating soup, he was taken aback by just how good the soup was today, seemingly better than the other days. He realized that this was because he added kelp. So, as any academic would, he wanted to know why.
In 1908, he realized that this taste was from an amino acid called glutamate, and when extracted and combined with sodium, created a terrific seasoning, hence the sodium and glutamate in monosodium glutamate.
But unlike MSG, its history was not all terrific. Because of the common use in Chinese restaurants in America and a history of anti-Chinese sentiment in America, MSG found its criticism early on. Many people claim that they were sensitive to MSG, which studies have found to not be based on any science.
But in the 1960s, a letter from a doctor was written to the New England Journal of Medicine, where he outlined that he got sick from either alcohol, sodium, or MSG, merely on the basis of speculation. But his most volatile idea from that letter was that he seemed to get sick every time he ate Chinese food.
Because of this connection between sickness and Chinese food, the hypersensitivity from MSG became quickly known as the Chinese restaurant syndrome, even though time and time again it has been shown that MSG does not cause this sickness. But even though it has been proven false, has hate surrounding MSG stayed?
So, Charlene, I think a good place to start talking about MSG is really, how much do you know about MSG? So what do you know about MSG?
From the history section and also from my own personal experience, number one, it makes things taste good. Number two, it was basically the way it was formulated. And number three, it's not as bad for you as people used to think. People, including me, basically.
Yeah.
I used to think it was really bad, too. My parents also used to think it was pretty bad. And then all of a sudden, instead of hearing, oh, it's bad for you, I'm hearing, it is not any worse for you than salt or anything else like that. So, interesting change, which, I mean, I welcome because it makes things taste delicious. But, yeah, that's that's most of it. And also, I know some details that I'll probably talk about later about how it began to end up harming the perception of Asian Americans in general. And yeah, that's it.
Very interesting. Now, one thing I will say about how much I know is that I didn't really know what it was until maybe like a few years ago. And that was already when a lot of that backlash towards like it's bad for you was pushing back,
Hmm.
I guess. So the only context I really knew it in was people said it was bad for you, but it's actually not bad for you. Like it's just as bad for you as like salt, and it's really all I know it in. I don't think I've ever seen like in person like a bag of MSG. Maybe I have, but I just didn't really like know it was MSG. So going into this, I think you are the expert, Charlene.
No, far from it.
And for anyone listening, I think Charlene is more of an expert than I am, even if you're far from it. You've have you used it? I think you told me you used it,
Well, I
right?
used a kind of different form of it. So growing up, my family used mushroom powder, which is like kind of
Hmm.
the same chemical that's used. It's glutamic acid, but it's not like an artificial. I think it's not artificial and not as highly concentrated, but it still gives foods that nice umami flavor. And I thought that was bad. I thought it was
Yeah.
bad. Like whenever I see it, like see that iconic mushroom powder container, I would be like, oh my god, that's what I'm eating. Oh my god. But no, even compared to
Hmm.
MSG, supposedly it is a lot healthier for you. But which MSG isn't even that bad to begin with. Now that we know, but yeah,
Yeah.
I used to think it was pretty bad. But I do remember having it with a lot of my food, especially when I grow up. I mean, you say you aren't an
Hmm.
expert, but like I don't know, have you say you witnessed any effects of like the negative perception of MSG like after you started paying attention to it? Like have you ever like went to a Chinese restaurant and seen them have a sign up that says like no MSG added or something like that?
Um, Not really. I mean, like around where I live,
Mhm.
there's only like one Chinese restaurant.
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever been in it because it's like, I don't know, like it's a little like of a sketchy place,
Mhm.
just because it's on like a sketchy block,
Right.
and the food does not look great due to the pictures
Mhm.
that they have on it.
Mhm.
So like, frankly, I never really. Like I've never seen that. I don't think I probably have because like where I used to live there were a lot of Chinese restaurants,
Mhm.
and I probably did see them. But again, like, you know, you don't start noticing stuff until you know what it is.
Yeah,
So
you don't start
I'm
noticing.
sure I've seen them.
Mhm.
Okay, so now we know we have a baseline of how much we know about it. Perhaps the audience is refreshed on a few stuff, especially from the history section. But then another thing to talk about before we even go into more things is you said umami.
Right.
What exactly, for anyone who doesn't know what umami is, what is umami?
It's basically a certain like I don't know how to describe it like fully, but it's basically a certain
Like a
okay,
taste.
yeah, it's a certain flavor and is one of the five senses, one of five basic tastes on
No.
top of
Yeah.
senses on top of like sweet, salty, bitter. It's
Yeah.
umami. It's basically like like a savory taste that you'd often find
Mhm.
in like meat, but also in things like cheese and tomatoes. Um, I don't really know how to
It, it
describe the
it's like
flavor
that
like
tang
isolated. I
that
don't.
you
Yeah, I don't know
taste,
how to
right?
describe the flavor when you isolate it. I just know the foods
I
that it's
feel
in.
like I mean I think it's a little bit of a weirder kind of like idea of a taste because something sweet you can be like, "Oh my," like you have like a reaction towards it, something that's sour.
Mm-hmm.
I think for umami, it's you don't have as strong of a reaction. At least, most foods that we have on Earth,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really get that like whoa, that's umami. The only thing I can really think of that's umami, I don't even know. I'm pretty sure this is umami, but like, have you ever had like gorgonzola?
No.
Well, anyone who has have gorgonzola, I always associate like umami with like the tanginess of like the mold and the cheese.
Tanginess, interesting. I
Um,
don't think I've ever
and
heard it described as tangy, like tanginess.
I mean, it's kind of like this like I don't know. That's just how I think about it. Even if it's not, whenever I think of umami, it's just that taste. Because I know it comes from like fermented foods. Um,
It comes from like
so
meat,
I don't know.
kind of like the
Yeah, yeah. It comes from a lot of stuff. It's kind of a weird taste.
yeah.
It's not like you probably have like I know that A lot of sushi is described as umami. Um,
Yeah, because it
I don't know.
is commonly found. It is a common flavor found in fish, and it was derived from seaweed. So
Mhm. So there you go. If I remember correctly, seaweed's in sushi. Some sushi. So yeah, so now we have that out of the way. We know what umami is, kind of. Bad description of it, but that's umami. If you have a better description for umami, leave it, comment it, like put it under an Instagram post, whatever. Preferably ours, so it's not out of context. You just put under someone's random post. Actually, umami is gonna go into your description, but no. If you have a much better description of umami or a better food to kind of pin it to, please leave it. We'd love to hear it. And I'm sure people who don't know what it is would love to hear it as well. So I think something to talk about, which is very important to talk about when talking about MSG, is its effect on the Asian American community
mm-hmm.
in America. We talked about in the history section. We talked about the Chinese restaurant syndrome, but we didn't talk much about how it affects people outside of like a restaurant. I can't really comment on this. But Charlene, do you feel like there's been any like social negative impact because of the Chinese restaurant syndrome?
I think there's no doubt that it definitely contributed to a lot of racism against Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, Chinese restaurants, stuff like that. I think it also the pre-existing racism against these groups, I think also contributed to making the claims stronger because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people were quick to associate it with Chinese food. While, of
Yeah.
course, that is not immediately the case. I mean, for reasons that make sense at first, I think, I mean, because people often, tend to associate any bad symptoms they might have to food that they just most recently ate, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think it does definitely lead to a lot more stronger opinions, and it definitely allowed those opinions to grow a lot more. That's what I think.
Yeah. Like from what I like the effects that I've heard about it, it's definitely like yeah, it really spawns from like a very like weird place. I think I let me see this. Because yeah, this is what I heard. So like the original claim was kind of bogus. There was no actual like scientific evidence
Right.
around it. Um and like the journal that talked about it was from like New England.
Mm-hmm.
Um which I don't think of New England as like the epicenter of Chinese culture in America. Um so I can see why there might be biases from that part of the nation, or at least from
Mm-hmm.
that person who lives in that part of the nation. I can see why it came around because I think injustice towards anybody from any Asian country is kind of one of the pillars that America is built on,
Mm-hmm.
sadly, um, as we've seen recently, and if you've taken any U.S. history course. So it's not surprising to me. But have you had any experiences, or do you know anyone who's had any experiences that like directly came from the bad rap from MSG?
Me personally, I don't think I have. Like, I think
Because like
they
yeah,
definitely impact like restaurant owners a lot because something I mentioned earlier was like how a lot of Chinese restaurants would end up putting no MSG because MSG became sort of known for being like a Chinese thing, like a Chinese American thing.
yeah,
So a lot of restaurants were definitely suffering as a result. So that's where I've seen it. It was also a really interesting case of this restaurant opening in New York City called Lucky Lee's, which I think definitely in response to like the MSG, to like the anti sort of MSG movement. It was basically a Chinese American restaurant that opened with the goal of creating like quote clean Chinese food, Chinese food that
hmm.
had no MSG, that was less oily and salty. But of course, as I am telling you guys this, you could probably guess that this place got very quickly shut down because there are definitely many stereotypes involved here with especially with the marketing, the use of the words more clean and less oily and no MSG, which is a big one here. Definitely they were trying to use that to basically get more customers, and that definitely just perpetuates the theme here. So of course they got shut down. Which is a very interesting example in my opinion.
So this was like recent, right?
This was, I think, in 2019 or 2018.
Oh, okay. So it was like, was it because they were unclean, or was it just because like people were like outraged by this?
People were angry, basically, that the owner was essentially describing Chinese food as unclean and oily because their marketing strategy was Chinese food that was not oily and salty and all that.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of digging yourself into your own hole, because even if by kind of playing, what you said before, playing into the stereotypes of your community to just be like, no, we don't do that. It kind of, I don't know. I think even if they didn't shut down because of backlash from that, I think, like it wouldn't have helped them in the long run anyway. Because I feel like when you say like something isn't, oily or something, and people like pay more attention to that, and it also like makes people question things a lot more. Like having something like oddly specific to your food, so like we don't have that, is like, well, why would you have that? And I feel that if that's one of the reasons why they've been shut down, they might not have just made money because of that. And there were a lot more factors.
Yeah, definitely. Also, the health food trend factor, because I think this restaurant also was like gluten free and things like that. So I mean, there's that, and there's also people complaining about cultural appropriation, which is a whole other thing. But the main thing that relates to this episode, it was how they were trying to essentially change things and use adjectives in their marketing that made Chinese food look bad. And MSG was one of them. So, definitely. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Spoonable Standpoint. If there's anything you want us to talk about, put it in the question we post on Spotify under our Season 2 trailer or on our website. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at spoonable_standpoint for bonus content and the link to our website. If you like this episode, don't forget to share. We release a new episode every other Friday, and we hope to see you there.